You guys like how I did that thing with my head trying to recenter it as if like I can't just move the box and it's not, whatever. Uh Emily can't see what I'm talking about. It's
I have
fine.
no idea what you're talking about.
Welcome to Making the Rounds. Production is still sucky. We're still
Whatever, and
rambly.
it's fine.
Yeah. Yeah, we're still rambly and we still talk about League. So, there's that.
All true.
Yeah. Uh, so if you're expecting some other drastic changes, you're in the wrong place.
You're not getting them.
Yeah, exactly. Um, so yeah, we actually had a lot of finals this week, so it's going to be the majority of our conversation. Well, I would say a lot of finals, but like two finals and things that resemble finals. So yeah, we'll do that. LEC. Everyone loves LEC, right? I love LEC. LEC, actually, my favorite thing about LEC is that people pretend they don't love LEC, but then the viewership is still really high. So, anyway, go ahead, Emily.
I was going to say, I feel like we've been stalwart LEC defenders on this podcast in the face of overwhelming LEC negativity.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I didn't see any sort of super surprises from either of these matches, honestly.
Yeah.
I do love that for like weeks now you've been telling MDK like, guys, just don't choose these team fights. And yet there were even some team fights that they like ended up winning that were still like really bad.
Yep.
Specifically like that topside fight. I think it was in game 1. That was the game they won, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Where I think Frescowie ends up dying really early, and then like Merwin can't really get in, but he keeps managing to do like little like chip damage from the side. Anyway, it's I was joking after, and we'll talk about them later. But after 100 Thieves qualified with Kelsey, that our two baby teams made it
Yeah. It
to
was very
Worlds in both
exciting.
MDK
Yeah.
and 100 Thieves. And I still think my opinion of MDK has not changed since the last time I talked about them. I still think they have the same strengths, and I still think they have the same weaknesses.
Yeah, I think we listed our favorite teams in the early episodes this year, and it was like MDK 100. I had wow, I'm really bad at names right now, but I had EDG and I think it was. Why can't I remember their name? I can see their logo in my head right now.
UP for summer.
Huh? What?
Was it UP for summer?
No, it was the LCK team.
Nongshim?
Yes, yeah, Nongshim. And like I guess out of those rosters, one completely collapsed and two made worlds, so it's it's not the worst. We've got that going for us. We sacrificed EDG to
Rip
the gods. So that 100 and MDK could make worlds.
That's fine. They won Valorant.
Yeah, true. I just I remember the Hotline League quote from what's his name, or from Boostio. It was like, yeah, the Asian regions will never catch up. It was like the double lift kind of echo.
It aged as well as the double lift thing. And he also, he's like a League fan, so he knew what he was.
He knew what he was doing. But it was funny because I think it was like his girlfriend on Twitter quoted it, said, I was like laying in bed watching the finals with him, and I said, babe, they're ruining all your hard work. Spectacular. Sometimes Valorant Twitter is really fun. But as we were saying, G2 won another finals. I guess like the best way to make this interesting is to ask the question, do you think that's good for the league, bad for the league?
So I actually think like as clowny as some of the gameplay was like leading up through season finals, I actually thought the finals was better, like went better than I expected for both teams. I also think it has been helpful that Fnatic like has been helpful for G2 that Fnatic have at least been able to push them in certain cases, like especially early, occasionally in team fights. I think not much about how either of these teams play and like their strengths and weaknesses. Again, like not a lot, if anything, has changed outside of the fact that I did think G2 looked better and more stable, especially in the finals in terms of like their map movements and stuff. I thought they took advantage of Fnatic a lot on the map, and I also thought they just played with fog and cross mapping a lot better, which is something you kind of expect when you think about, or what I consider to be Fnatic's weaknesses, which are some of their map setups, and then also their default to kind of just rotate mid and hope that they can catch you out in a fight. And I think G2 already know that. So you're dealing with two teams that know each other very well, who haven't necessarily improved exponentially on some of their weaknesses, specifically Fnatic. I know people are just going to look at that first game and be like, how do you lose with a, was it 600 stack Smolder, I think? And I'd actually say if Fnatic hadn't been as hesitant as they were, they could have closed out that game. I thought their own basically like I don't know if it's in trying to shore up one of their weaknesses of making like snap decisions and choosing some of these fights, or they were waiting for like the perfect fight that never happened. Not really sure, but they seem to not really know what to do despite having the like scaling team fight power on their side. The biggest thing that came out of this for me is that I do think, again, depending on boot camp and leading up to Worlds, because boot camps are also going to be weird because Worlds is in Europe, but I would presume that most people, since the LPL and LCK teams are not going to come over until they have to, are just going to go, at least my assumption, I don't know this, but my assumption from US teams or NA teams is that they're going to go over to Korea to boot camp and then all fly to Europe. But depending on their boot camp, I actually think G2 still could have like a pretty solid by comparison Worlds performance. The biggest thing they still need to work on, in my opinion, is just their early game. And I am also slightly concerned about Yikes champ and overall play. So we'll see.
Well, on the plus side, you know, we've got I think so. You mentioned that like G2 Fnatic kind of pushed G2. And in some ways, I would say that like other teams have pushed G2 more just because they're better at the things G2 suck at than Fnatic are. I don't even think Fnatic's early game is the best in LEC or anything, right? Or that they play around jungle that well. So I think it's been a year where G2 got pushed. I don't know again if it's like I said, I don't know again if it's going to be a situation where how do I put this? I don't know again if it's going to be a situation where it feels like G2 will have suffered. Like I guess the big question we're really getting at is like G2 worse, or have they been pushed in ways that they're not used to getting pushed, or both, right? And I think the answer is kind of probably both. But I also think that G2 are still shoring up and executing on mid-game macro like way better than a lot of teams that exist globally. Like, I don't know. I'm so glad JDG lost. Like, this is a thing, but it's like, it pissed me off so much how poorly JDG were playing in the regionals in terms of map macro. Like, I've literally, I swear, I haven't seen macro this bad since like 2015 North America. Like, I don't know. It was terrible. So
God.
I'm just like from, and they still took Weibo to 5, right? They still took Nip to,
Yeah.
they still like beat Nip, right? So I don't know, like it's one of those where G2 are still way better than a lot of teams at certain things. Like you can look at teams globally that are like, I think Peter Dunn made the tweet about TL lane swaps, and it's like, well, no shit, TL are better at lane swaps because they're doing it way more, right? Like so there will be little things that teams practice more that they do better than international counterparts. And yes, their international counterparts might be able to pick up on it, but I swear like G2 have kind of been ahead on a lot of macro trends for many, many years, and people haven't really adopted it as easily. I would say like one exception is like they were the first team to really consistently like play the 2 lane kind of control strat where they're like very well in terms of like vision retakes and playing 2 lanes and ignoring the 3rd lane, which is just like the way most people default play macro now. Um, but that was like their big advantage in 2019. So they haven't had an advantage like that in many, many years, right? But they have still had an advantage. I guess for me, that's just to say that I am not low on G2 going into Worlds. I think G2 is still going to perform like sort of what we expect, which is like push some of the top teams in LPL LCK, but not win. You know, so that's kind of like where I see G2. Anyway, we seem bored by LEC already.
Yeah, I mean, no, I wasn't. I actually looked at this and I was like,
Okay,
oh,
yeah.
like I looked at the finals and I was like, oh, both of these teams look like marginally improved, right? Which is nice. Like that, it's nice to, you know, go from a lot of really, in my opinion, like very egregious mistakes that you wouldn't expect these teams to necessarily make, to looking better in finals. But I also think like analytically, there's not much that these two teams did that wasn't expected, right? So it's not like I came out of LEC finals being like, whoa, so and so looked way differently than I expected, because that's not true.
Yay. Well, I mean, again, like the funniest thing to me was I always try to defend FNC macro because I think that they actually do set up fast plays well sometimes, but it's really inconsistent. So it's just really funny to me that the game that they won, the fight basically started like at their T2 or whatever and ran all the way down into G2's base. Then again, it's like, okay, this is basically just Fnatic right here on my screen. I'll take it. I'm fine with
Take
it.
it, you're just like, all right.
I accept it. I'm done fighting. It's just what it is. But in a way, you know, they've embraced it. It's fine. They're at least not JDG. It's okay.
Rip JDG.
God bless. Speaking of JDG, since that was like the only other finals that happened this week, we can go into that, and then we can.
Weibo doing us a solid and qualifying, or Weibo doing us a solid and qualifying TES.
Yeah, I mean, that was something. I was like, I literally, because I couldn't, because of where I am right now. I have moved a location for a new job, and I'm currently like, the way I usually do it is I stay at an Airbnb for a couple of weeks while I look for an apartment, right? So I'm sharing an Airbnb with someone, and I'm not gonna degen stream in the middle of the night. LPL games when the walls are thin. So I've been just doing VOD reviews in the morning, in the early morning when I feel like it's acceptable for me to be, like, socially acceptable for me to be awake and talking. And I knew both times for the Weibo series that they just got blasted 3-0. And I look at the score on the second day when it's LNG Weibo, and I'm like, do I really want to get out of bed and spend an hour and a half watching Weibo get blasted again? Do I really want to do that? I did. But Yeah, it was just very funny because I didn't even think, like, again, like I was there were actually points in the JDG Nip series where I was like legitimately interested in like NIP's macro, which I have heretofore said is like the worst macro in the top teams or in playoffs. And I was there were times where I was like Weibo was actually playing the map okay, but it was just like I don't like I LNG and Weibo are still the most frustrating teams to me because every time I get an image in my head of like how good they are at a certain thing, they just like completely fail to execute it the next game I watch them, right? It's like, they're winning because they're good at X. And then it's like, okay, we just didn't do X this game. Like what are we doing? Like I don't understand. So it's like so for me it's just all year I've told people I refuse to predict LNG games. It's like not possible. I can't do it. And now it's like LNG and Weibo are both at Worlds, so I give up. I'm not predicting their groups. Have fun.
We have the TES sacrifice because they're in second seed. I'm pretty sure the last time they were in second seed was the year that they dropped a game to GAM in
And didn't make
group
it. Yeah,
that didn't make it out. Which is always fun.
but they're
Obviously
winning Worlds.
with the new format that will not happen. Sure.
They're winning Worlds. I'm staying on this hill. Okay.
Um, I do think it's kind of nutty that Xiaohu has made Worlds
No,
every
I mean,
single year of his career except for 2020 and then the GAMT year in 2015. Um, and it's also interesting because he was so bad at the beginning.
wow. Just calling
It's
them out
like
like that.
I mean, we said it last time too,
I know.
and then we had the whole last episode. We had the whole conversation of like you brought up. You're like how much because he was on some of those RNG teams with UCI, right? And also like how much do you want to potentially take it easy prior to the slog that ends up being um the end of summer into playoffs into regional qualifier, which I know a lot of people were also looking at the Weibo LNG game and being like, typical LPL fashion, like you get blasted by PLG, and then the next day you have to turn around and play your first gauntlet match. So it's a pretty Spartan environment. And they did end up getting blasted by LNG before qualifying through the lower bracket portion of the regional qualifier. But yeah, it's I have faith in neither of these teams, but I think I do stick with my opinion that I think with Breathe and Tarzan coming onto the team, I do actually think their top sides look better. Shahu's been performing better. Light, I think, has been a pretty consistent performer throughout. I just think it's hard when the entire map, especially mid lane, is collapsing on you. You're just not going to have as many opportunities as Nate carry to look that great. And yeah, we'll see what these teams do. I have like no expectation, no expectation. Sorry,
I
LNG
mean,
and
yeah.
Pro. I wish nothing but the best for you. But if you're asking me if one of these teams are winning worlds, I would say probably not.
Someone asked me yesterday, like, do you think like the Asian teams are weaker? And I said, first of all, this year going into Worlds than last year. I said, first of all, it's like a very generalized statement. Speaking from the LPL perspective, usually like the fourth seed is useless anyway. So now we just have a useless third seed and a useless fourth seed. It's fine. Who can say?
Forget LGB, what, 2020?
God bless. Um, but yeah, I think it'll be super fun. I think just to see what happens with the LPL teams because, like I said, like it's very obvious that Weibo and LG can punch up. Like they're the epitome of we might talk about that, but this isn't the like NA section, but they're kind of like the epitome of everyone is super experienced. Everyone knows how to play, how to like clutch out a series if necessary, right? For the most part. Everyone kind of like has their moments where they can take the game in their hands, and so there will just be some times where you get like this crazy overperformance from like Xiaohu on Lucian, or like Zika has been. I had Zika as like my first All Pro top laner for summer. I think he's actually just been insane. Um, so it's just like there's a lot of like LNG Weibo. I think the best way to talk about like why Weibo and LNG are so hard to predict is sometimes it does just feel like an overperformance from a single member or from like a couple members of a team that just like carries it through. And I hate like analyzing teams that way because I usually think teams like have a system or build themselves up, but I feel like with those teams, it's like genuinely true that that is the case. So yeah, I guess we'll see how they do.
I'm sure we'll talk about them more when we actually do the official making the rounds
Oh
look
yes,
ahead. But I would agree with that as well. I think Scout is another player like that, as well as Gala too.
yeah, like pretty much anyone on those rosters can do it. I guess is kind of the thing.
One other fun thing that I want to point out is so many old RNG members. I saw LPL Fan Club had a really fun tweet where they just put side by side like all the old RNG members making it. We just need, I guess, Breathe to role swap to support,
And then we have
we'll have
yeah.
we'll
Oh
have
my
a
god,
full actual functional team.
man. Maybe
Uh,
if we do like some historical topics, we'll do a moratorium on what happened to Ming this year. Because Jesus Christ,
oh,
that's
that
so
just
tragic.
makes me sad. That'd be a depressing episode, but I'm down. Ugh. Meanwhile, we can also have is Mako the best support ever?
Yeah,
Is he the support GOAT? Because that's actually a legitimate
it
conversation that
is
people
for sure.
should be having.
I think so too. I think you can make arguments for various supports in from LCK at different times in their careers. Um, but Mako has just been consistently good since 2015, and it's like really hard to name another support with that level of longevity and that level of performance at this moment in time. So yeah.
Pretty
So
cool.
yeah, this is going to be one of the most meandering episodes because
Yeah.
we don't really have like an outline or anything. Normally we have an outline.
Like, let's talk about
Emily was probably like irritated because I hadn't sent an outline in the middle of the night last night, and so she just sent me like 3 lines, and I was like, "Looks good. We'll go with this."
I mean, honestly, a lot of these things like blur together, and also for talking about teams specifically at Worlds, I do want to do like a look ahead in that. And additionally, I know a lot of people will be maybe shocked if they didn't watch LPL this split. Maybe shocked that JDG didn't make it, especially after how well that team did last year, right? And how they were on the path to the Golden Road. But I think if you because I was thinking in talking about LPL and LEC, was there anything that like shocked me? And no, the answer is just no. So it's a very meandering yeah, that sure happened. And I think the only thing that people might be confused about from the outside is like why JDG didn't make it. But to your point, their macro has been pretty bad. And if you watch them in playoffs, it's really not a surprise that they're not qualifying. I still do think Weibo are the biggest surprise considering their early summer performance was so bad, but then you have to factor in the roster changes and then also their late season performance was better. So,
I mean,
I think if you watched LPL all year, you shouldn't be shocked that JDG didn't make it because there was always a chance that they would get bested by one of these other teams.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most interesting thing about JDG not making it is that Like, you have to kind of be of the opinion that LPL is better this split than last split. The reason why you have to kind of be of that opinion is because you had two teams that were basically just completely black holes when they should have been performing, which were Weibo and LNG, right? Those teams just like didn't perform at all. And so the fact that they're able to punch up and be better than who was like the third place team last year in JDG and also the fourth place team in NIP, right? Is like a should arguably be a positive sign, especially since this should be a good meta for JDG, right? It should be, right? It's very jungle centric. You can kind of play whatever in top lane, so your top lane pool shouldn't matter as much, and your I mean, there's a lot of reasons, but the biggest thing for me, and then I actually thought Yagao had like one of the best seasons overall of his career individually, right? The big thing for me that I think a lot of people don't point out, especially, and they won't point out because I think Ruler performed super well in regionals individually, is that bot lane was suffering a lot this season in regular season. And then like the team couldn't get it together and clutch up in regionals. But I think overall, like JDG are not worse than they were in spring, and as a result, it only means that like LPL as a region is slightly better because Weibo and LNG got it together, right? Does that mean their peak as a region is better? No, but it means that probably like overall, it's better that we're sending these two teams than NIP JDG. So that's pretty much it.
I agree with that, even with the, I guess, the legacy names on those rosters, obviously, right? Because like everyone wants to see Rookie qualify for Worlds again. Everyone wants to see Ruler qualify for Worlds again. So I think that's a lot of it too.
Yep. That's pretty much the finals and regionals that happened. We can go ahead and briefly touch on LCK because I think the big topic is going to be 100 Thieves C9.
Yeah.
But we can briefly touch on LCK. Is anything like really standing out to you other than, do you think, I guess the biggest thing for me is like, do you think T1 HLE will be more interesting this time?
I think it's going to be tough. I think like, so for example, take T1 in, which series was it? It was the Zillion Neela game. It was the first game against DK, which is a series that T1 won, but this is the game that they lost. And even here, I actually thought like, okay, this is kind of interesting, right? Like I like interesting Neela comps. Maybe it's one of my weaknesses because I liked FlyQuest.
Neela's fun, yeah.
All right. But yeah, the XP shenanigans that you can do with this composition are really fun. This is the kind of experimental draft that I actually really love seeing from T1. I thought up until they thought they could take, was it? I'm just trying to remember. I think it was first Grub fight because they just took Neil over to 6. And they were like, oh, we got the XP advantage. We can totally take this fight. And they could not. Which is an execution thing based on like their perception of strength versus like going up against this much earlier game, I would say, Talia Vi combination with the Ziggs. I like when T1 do things like this, even though they lost this game. And again, this is from the DK series. This is not from their HLE series where they got blasted pretty hard. If T1 are going to, do the inevitable Genji versus T1 in the finals and topple Hanwha, they need to, I think, continue drafting stuff like this where they're experimenting a bit more. And even then, I think it's going to be tough because this is a really good meta for Hanwha. Specifically, I think Top lane is in a really good spot for Doran, and Zeka's champ pool specifically is like kind of perfect considering how strong Yone can be in a lot of these compositions. So for T1, I would still like to see some experimental drafts from them because I think that's kind of the way that you win. But in terms of talking about the matchup, they will have to overperform to expectations to beat Hanwha, who I think are really comfortable in this meta. And I also think Owner, who has been one of the brightest spots like across the board on T1, even when they have been struggling this split, was really outpathed by Peanut in their first series, and so they're gonna have to find a way to deal with that, right? Peanut just sometimes like rocks up to a game and absolutely destroys his opponent, just based on like his overall experience as a jungler and like where he can be. And so I think in that way it's also a mismatch because one of their best performing players across the split in Owner is can be outmatched, or at least tracked really well by HLE because of Peanut. So I don't know. I just think I see Hanwha as a team that's just really comfortable right now in draft. Feels like they have a lot of options, especially now that they play a bit better in some of these Ziggs compositions, with Viper looking way more comfortable on it, specifically in the T1 series. So yeah, that's like if T1 have a chance, I think it's going to be doing some really creative things in draft and trying to like upset what Hanwha wants to do. But I think Hanwha are the better team. So even if T1 are able to take some games, I still think Hanwha should be favored going into this.
Yeah. I mean, it's actually another one of those where it's like I think T1 and TS in my head have similar frustrations, meaning that I feel like a lot of their problems are draft related. And sometimes their drafts are just like they just show up on the day and have like the worst read on how a draft should play out and then don't adapt well in series. And that's like they're also so that's like I guess what I mean by that. And so when I watch T1 games, I feel like that's a lot of the issue that I run into with them. And HLE, like to their credit, I feel like HLE just they know how they want to play. So you're not gonna get a ridiculous amount of like crazy surprising drafts. They're just gonna play like their game and always have like a solid playable comp, right? So that's kind of like why I favor them in this situation. Do I think there's a world where T1 can win? Realistically, yeah, but also T1 are not making worlds, so no. Anyway.
We'll say
yeah.
like, since Ziggs has been so high prio, they did look more comfortable on it in the DK series. So like obviously DK is not as strong of an opponent as Hanwha Life. However, you did see them thinking about, okay, you know, this is a really strong pick. We need to pick this up and we need to play around it better. And I liked seeing that evolution from them in their very next series, right?
Yeah.
So that's also like a really good sign for T1 as well. I still do think like I agree with you in Hanwha Life in that they do a thing that I actually think, weirdly enough, 100 Thieves are also good at, which is they pick compositions that are not only like pretty good in the meta, like the meta is really good for them right now, like I said, but then additionally that their players are very comfortable playing and they know their roles within the team composition overall, right? I think HLE are really good at that. And it's a good meta for them. So we'll see. I hope it's like a banger series and it goes, you know, it's better than the first match, which was kind of Hanwha rolling over them. I think T1 have made adjustments throughout the playoffs that the matchup will be at the very least closer if it still goes Hanwha Life's way. So that's good. Like I just hope for a good series. I still am picking Hanwha to make it to finals, and then I'm picking Gen G to win. And I will pick Gen G to win regardless of opponent. I just think
So
they are going to win again.
I had a viewer bring up a fun fact in chat, kind of to close this out, which is that since, like she did this going all the way back to 2015, there's not been a situation where in all 4 major regions the same team has won finals both spring and summer. Yes,
It's really fun.
So this could be the first year that it happens. It's already happened in LPL and LEC. Usually, I would argue LPL is like one of the worst perpetrators of screwing this over. So, I mean, LCK is usually pretty consistent, and so it'll be really interesting because we just have LCK left. So, she said that it could be possible for earlier, but she just didn't go back and calculate the earlier years as well. So that would be like a fun one to see if it could actually happen. So yeah.
I mean, 2020, once you go back to 2014, since it was still OGN champions, I know it's not possible for OGN champions. There was never a year where the same team won all 3.
Yeah.
So already, it would be.
And I know LCS, your EU LCS, because that's what it was then, was very inconsistent with spring summer winners before that as well. So it was like Fnatic sometimes, and then I don't know, flip a coin. But yeah, good times. So that's a fun one. So now we can talk about LCS, which I think probably had the most surprising result this week of any region. Yes. I don't think that's like a debatable conversation. Though I will say...
I mean, we just talked about how LPL and LEC both went. Like, we didn't even cover the LPL final because it was just hurry out by PLG.
But I will say... go ahead. Yeah.
I was just going to say, like, it didn't look close. Even when BLG playing like absolute demons.
True. The result was not a surprise to LEC GOAT supporters. I agree. But I think for me it was like I would not, like, even for me, who I at the start of the split said I don't think C9 is going to Worlds and kind of never dropped that line, I was still surprised that 101. Like, surprised and happy because I think like they're more interested. I have more fun watching 100 games than C9 games usually, and I think it was the Neyman interviewers. They did an interview with Spooks, the assistant coach, and he said that C9 were just predictable. Like, you could predict what they were doing at every round, and even our players would basically identify ahead of time in comms like exactly what C9 were going to do. And we talked about this last week, where C9's not even that bad in terms of macro. They just, they just play it like the most standard way you can, right? So I think that was also like a big part of it, and I'm really glad that, like, for me, this is more a celebration of like 100 clutching up to identify that weakness from C9 rather than an identification of like, oh, I can't believe C9 collapsed and choked at the last minute. But I know that that's the narrative at the moment.
Yeah. I mean, I think to I guess segue from talking about HLE to 100 Thieves, one thing that I think is, again, consistent about 100 Thieves that I've talked about with specifically Grayson and how he and Spook's draft for this team, that's super interesting, is that even when I don't like a draft from them, when I think it's like pretty risky, like I thought the Yasuo draft against Dig was really risky, and there's still a big chance that they like lose that game. It came down to a lot of mistakes on Dignitas's part. I do think the drafts are things that these players are really comfortable with, right? And like understand what they're supposed to do. With the exception of sometimes Sniper, like I think Sniper is still really working on like what he is doing in team fights and like what his role is, what he's targeting and like when he's coming into a fight. I think he's improved, but I still think you could see some of those pain points even in the C9 series. On the flip side, you could also see very similar pain points from Thanatos, who has one less split of like tier 1 competitive under his belt. So they had similar issues, and Thanatos just had less experience. And I think like he's had more trouble syncing up with his team in team fights than Sniper has this split, weirdly enough, even though Sniper's had some pretty egregious TP flying. But I think the big thing to me is another big thing to me with this 100 Thieves lineup is looking at how the meta has shifted. I also think it suits River and Quid well enough, and also Tomo specifically really well. So when Tomo came onto this team, I think it really helped a lot, not necessarily because the one thing I was afraid of is, oh, maybe it will pull River to focus a lot more on bot side, kind of like how XU would path almost entirely for bot lane, because Tomo and Isles would just constantly be pressuring in the 2v2, and then they would set up bot dives that way. I think it actually opened up a lot more for their solo laners, which is much more how 100 Thieves like to play, just having some sort of stability in the bot lane. I also just thought like they're so much more comfortable with Ziggs than C9 were. And that was actually ended up being a major factor in this series, where not only were C9 predictable in terms of what they want to do, but then the way that they were drafting was not, I think, optimal for what C9 as a team necessarily like. I'm trying to think of how to say this. Basically, like I don't think if I'm drafting for C9, I would want to put Berserker on something that has more agency, kind of like the Kaisa pick in the second game. Not that, so I actually disagree with, because I had a fight with Azale about this. Whether MF is bad or not. Yeah.
MF is not bad.
No, she's really good. But I think like if C9 are going to try to play this way, they need to like find better opportunities to rotate her around the map, to take down turrets, because I think people look at the ult setup and not having a lot of lockdown for her ult is also super important. But the bigger strength of MF, I think, is her laning and how she can really pressure turrets early, which I think is kind of an underrated thing that maybe people aren't necessarily looking at when you look at how she fits into a composition. But that being said, if I have like Blabber and Berserker on this team, I kind of want them playing different things than Ivern and MF, just based on their like strengths as players. And I know obviously Jojo is going to get a ton of heat for the LeBlanc picks. I feel like all of C9 have been getting a ton of heat for like draft. Looking at it outside of draft, there's the predictability aspect. There's also like, you and I said this when they picked up Thanatos, and this is, by the way, not me blaming Thanatos. It's just me saying from the get-go, we were both like, this doesn't help their issues that they had in spring, right? Like top lane, not like dominating lane, and Fudge's laning stats actually were not even bad, by the way. But like top lane not absolutely destroying their opponents every single game in lane, right, was not the problem with C9. And so adding Thanatos maybe gives you more laning pressure in standard lanes. But he looked really lost in a lot of team fights, just due to a lack of experience. And the roster move was kind of like, okay, we're going to stick with what has been working for us, which is playing around like pushing lanes and our laners just individual prowess. And then we're going to do that even more by adding Thanatos to this roster. And then that did not work out because a lot of their existing issues were not fixed from spring to summer.
Yeah, I mean, like we had said this on the show, and I think we said this because I responded to a comment by Loyoda, which was that like the INT analyst who worked with Furfly for like quite a while, was that like one of the big things that was missing on C9, the split from his perspective, was actually Mithy, because Mithy was the lightning rod for like all of the blame and criticism. In spring, and this year there wasn't really like that lightning rod, so the players just kind of had to tank it, right? Like Reaper isn't that active on socials. Like the management didn't say much. Then I think like David Hahn a little bit later made a post like, please don't attack the players, right? Like this is on me, which props to him for sure, for making a comment like that. But like I feel like when they changed Mithy and Fudge, I was like, first of all, changing top lane very rarely matters that much, right? Like, I mean, let's be honest. Like, I made the kind of thing because I have to big up my boy Serdi. So I made the comment that like I think NRG swapping top lane would take them to Worlds. Probably realistically a ridiculous statement to make, right? But I have to like give props to my boy Serdi, so I will make that comment, you know. But the who's like also had a good year, even though Fly are not making the challengers. The whatever. We can talk about that another time.
Yeah.
The but the TLDR I think is like top lane's not going to change that much for you, especially when your core issue is like the synergy between mid jungle and coaching stuff. Like I could see why people had a lot of faith in Reaper, because traditionally like his split one performances are good. Like when he first joins a team, he usually improves it in split one. His track record after that is like really inconsistent, but usually there is that. But it did not occur this split. Like I think in general, there's probably a lot of cultural issues on the team, like culture different in terms of culture. I mean, like differences of opinion on how the team should operate. That would be very difficult to turn around after a split of already playing together. This is a situation where either you do a lot of like conversations in off season with the members remaining, and really like kind of figure out what went wrong and how you're going, and commit to like making a huge mentality shift, or you just kind of scrap it, decide like which players are you're going to keep for next year, and then try to find players who like complement how they want to approach the team culture and environment, right? And I think that that's probably more likely to happen, because the first is like very hard to manage unless you're just a really stellar like mental coach or really stellar with personality management, which I don't necessarily think is Reaper's reputation at all. So unless they're also getting a new coach, hard to say, you know. So yeah, I think that's definitely an issue.
I think you can also see Reaper's coaching philosophy, and I'm not here to like overly criticize it, just saying that it might not have been the best match for this specific team. In that he himself has said, right, like as long as we're all working towards improving as like 5 individual players, the rest will kind of come. And that's not to say that the team isn't reviewing like macro plays, right? But that the overarching philosophy, at least it seems to me from Reaper, is that as long as we're all just continuing to improve as 5 individuals and we become really, really good players, naturally that will give us a competitive advantage over our opponent, right? And that kind of coaching doesn't necessarily give the team itself like a direction when it comes to how they're going to play, right? So I think then it's up to, okay, who is making the main play calls, especially early on this team, and who is calling for specific fights. And that's also why I think, like, again, Thanatos is adjusting to a completely new environment, completely new country. He's learning English. And he's also not played in a situation where I think it really mattered what his like ideology was, I guess, in team fights. Like, you can see it a lot when he played Cassante, and there were times when he really should have just marked their opponent and then healed for Berserker, right? And instead, when he sees the angle, he like goes in because that's what he's used to doing. Like, he's used to just being able to go in and outplay his opponents. And that's a shift that has to happen going from a challengers league to like tier 1 play, even though like people are going to be like, well, Emily, LCK challengers is way more mechanically like skilled, and that is absolutely true. But I think you can also apply that to how he approaches a lot of team fights, right? Where it's like, I can just outplay someone and then it'll be fine. I mean, I think Sniper has the same issue, actually. I just think he's had an entire year now with this team, so he has like improved incrementally across the board. But I think you can see him making similar mistakes as well. And the reason why I'm pointing this out is just to say that like I think this is like a small thing that you can point out that was why, like, just another reason why I guess the philosophy behind the change and the lineup might like, or definitely didn't work in their favor. This is really complicated. I just realized like I basically word saladed for like the past like minute, but hopefully the ultimate point came across.
I got it. We're good. Thank you for the resub, Cubby. Appreciate it. 11 months, Pog. So yeah, we've got a lot of fun times in C9 camp. I think for me though, like I said, I think it has a lot more to do with like props for 100's adaptation, even though C9 stayed the same, right? Like I think the big narrative for me is just like C9 stayed the same. Their approach to the game didn't improve. They kind of doubled down on it. It did not work out, and 100 Thieves worked out. And I think for me, when going into the season, my biggest question mark on
Subscribe to twitch.tv/Karen Moser, and you can enjoy all the Kelsey Moser LPL content you could ever want. Subscribe now,
like,
twitch.tv/Karen Moser.
Anyway, you have to think. So basically, I lost my train of thought. I was talking about how my biggest question mark for 100 Thieves going into 2024 was basically the laning of each of their members in the individual laning. And this is why we talked about last split why River deserved like so much props and why I was like on the River MVP train, right? So the adaptation that they made, I think, was accidentally the correct one in terms of like roster management for Tomo, which is that Meech, obviously, I think it was publicly announced that Meech chose to step down, which I will let that be the narrative because I think it's good if that's the narrative. I don't know the actual thing that happened. It may well be the actual thing that happened. I'm not trying to insinuate anything weird. Anyway, so Meech stepped down, and then Tomo, they picked up Tomo, who was performing very well on DSG, right? For me, like I put Tomo, I was actually a big Tomo doubter going into the year because I thought like his T5 positioning needed a lot of work in particular, but his laning was extremely solid in Dig, and I actually had him in my top 3 for All Pro because I thought that his play enabled like a lot of Dignitas's victories on the spring roster. And then so I think like accidentally, Tomo ended up being exactly what they needed because he just gave them a strong lane that they didn't have to worry about, right? He just gave them like a strong lane that they didn't have to worry about. And I don't know if I've said this on the show, but one thing that I always like try to talk about with Ayla is when it got into playoffs, Ayla actually had the most stable mental of like almost any player I've worked with. I had full faith that like no matter what happened, Ayla would perform as well or better in regular season as he would in playoffs. A lot of players will like feel more nervous. They'll either overperform, they'll underperform, they'll like have a lot more pressure going into playoffs. But Ayla was like extremely mentally stable, and however you rate his play, like that's actually huge going into high pressure matches. So you have a bottom lane that's like really, really reliable. But you have a bottom lane that's like really, really reliable, and you have a jungler who really understands like how to manage his solo laners because he's been playing with them all year, and the team is just like extremely solid at that point, right? In the general overall makeup of the roster. And I think that that's like a big, again, because we talked about this last week as well, where it's like, even if you don't think Tomo is like the GOAT of AD, if you know that he fulfills a specific role and you're bringing him in, then it makes it very easy to identify how your team will play together after that, right? If you can clearly identify and understand the role that the player plays, you build the rest of the strategy around the new player and it works out, right? That's literally sometimes like what the honeymoon phase is when you get a new player at the last minute. So huge props to Tomo and huge props to like 100 Thieves adapting around how he plays and understanding how he plays like more than anything. Also, good, like Tomo, would be someone I would give MF to. Just saying. Because he could actually use double ups and like lane positioning. So good times.
Yeah. I mean, I think he'd make the most of her in lane. I also think they would probably just use her not exactly like a Ziggs, but again, really similarly, where like if wherever you want to apply lane and turret pressure early, they showed that they were at least mindful about that in Ziggs compositions, and it ended up kind of at times really, really stopping what C9 wanted to do. For 100 Thieves as well, I think another slight shift that happened is that some of the AD melee options are a lot better now, like the Yasuo, like the Yone, which is really, really good for Quid, because I do think, like, even with all the stuff we've said about Tomo just being a way more stable laner, and just a stable presence so that River can play more around his solo lanes, I definitely also think that the meta shift did hurt 100 Thieves a lot, because River is so good at playing around his solo lanes. He's so good at recognizing like when he can apply pressure to lanes. And part of his efficiency in skipping camps is that he would always help either reset the wave in a really good way, or actually end up getting a kill for one of his solo laners and snowballing it that way. And I think the AP jungle AD carry mid meta was not super suitable for that, because you just give up a lot more if you're still punting your jungle clear to try to help your laners and you're on something that's like an AP power farmer. But the slight meta shifts, again, more towards like mages. Quid is an insane Azir player as well. I'd argue it's actually still one of his best champs, even though people in LCS don't necessarily think of him that way. If you remember when he first came in and he was struggling on literally everything but Azir. And so I think those slight shifts on 14-16 also ended up really helping out 100 Thieves as well, because they were able to play in a style that they're a lot more comfortable with a few like draft tweaks, which again plays into what I think they've been good at all year, which is that the 100 Thieves coaching staff puts their players on things that they are comfortable with and know like how to execute.
Hooray. Let's see. So,
but yeah, they're going to Worlds.
Yeah,
I was really happy. I was really happy for them. I was happy that I got to do the post-match interview because they were all like
high energy,
vibrating with happiness. Yeah.
No, I think very fun. It's a good group. Obviously, like I'm happy for the guys I've worked with, like Ayla, Jungle Juice, Chimera. Excited to see them succeed with this kind of roster. I think it was like a kind of 100 Thieves pipe dream project that existed when I was there, and like I give Jungle Juice credit for being able to take some Zoomers to Worlds. So let's go. The and also Chimera, I will like constantly give props to. I think he's like arguably the most valuable analyst in the LCS scene. He does like really solid work. All the players like him, and like he gives useful scouting reports instead of this is where they place their wards without context. So I did not just call out literally every analyst in the league space.
Oh,
right there. Okay. But good
now
times.
I know how to get a job as a team analyst. Tell people where to place wards.
Just tell people this is where they place wards at times without context, and you know it's fine. But all right. So I think so like huge shout out. Also like happy Ayla made it. I think it's just very interesting. I think the other elephant in the room is like everyone flaming Jojo. That's like probably the other thing we'll get the most questions about. So I don't know if you wanted to talk about that or not, because I think we just kind of avoided it.
Not on purpose. I mean, I didn't realize it would have been easy to, I guess, predict that he would be facing most of the flame. But I didn't realize he was, because for me, I feel like everyone has been getting flamed except for Thanatos. And that's mainly because I think people recognize, like, even if he didn't play well, especially in team fights, like it's not really his fault coming on to the team. So I think people have been kind of giving him a break, outside of just saying that the roster change itself was not a good idea, and the whole like bring back Fudge movement. I haven't seen as anti-Thanatos as much as I've just seen it as people recognizing like Fudge A wasn't the problem, and B probably would have been better set up in team fights than Thanatos, who seemed to really struggle to synchronize with the rest of the team. For Jojo specifically, I think teams, so going back to midsummer, specifically, I guess this is a little past midsummer, but the C9 TL series, which I really liked overall, that best of 3. I think from that, teams recognized you can really attack mid early sometimes, or mid wave early in a lane swap. And if you try to do that and just kind of essentially try to keep Jojo down early, it works really well, especially when he's not on a pick like the Corki or something that generally scales well, and they can just focus on getting him farm and sides once laning kind of ends, or just switch up your lane assignment so he's getting farm and sides. I still think he was such an important part of how this team was successful, just because of his laning. And, you know, because he was so good at just holding mid generally as a really important pressure point for the way that C9 wanted to play, right? Because then you give Blabber like completely free time to farm. The map is pushed up in at least one lane, usually multiple as well, especially since they would put Thanatos on stuff he was super comfortable with in lane as well, and he would regularly have CS advantage and push him topside. But I don't blame Jojo for this specific loss. I do think the fact that he ended up having comparatively less impact in this series than he usually does has to do with drafting, and also has to do with just, again, teams recognizing that if they destabilize C9 mid, C9 is still going to be really predictable in terms of how they want to play around mid prio and mid pressure. And especially on something like LeBlanc, where you really, really want to get ahead super early. It was the first game, right? Where they really attacked Jojo mid?
Yeah.
Let me go back and see. Yeah. So, like, I think that, like super, super early, basically, if he didn't get ahead, and if this entire team kind of didn't get ahead, which they did, they just didn't get enough ahead, and then that's when you talk about, again, how predictable they are, how 100 Thieves were able to take advantage of that in certain fights. And this game was the most back and forth in that regard, because at one point it looked like 100 Thieves are going to win, then C9 ended up, I think, taking that Grub, or 100 Thieves took that Grub or Rift Herald fight, might have been Rift Herald, where they really shouldn't have, and then C9 went out, and then they lose in that mid lane fight, and then they eventually get outscaled. But I think they attacked Jojo early on, and yeah, I mean, if you don't think that Jojo's lane pressure wasn't a super important part of how C9 looked as good as they did in summer, then I disagree with you, because I think he was actually super important.
I thought you were gonna get like a condemning comment.
No, I was thinking of like where that was going. I was like, I just vehemently disagree. I think he was actually super important, and like,
I was waiting for like, you're absolutely crazy. I disagree with you respectfully.
I disagree with you.
Okay.
Anyway, yeah, I think Jojo was super important. I think the drafts were, like, especially, what was it, game 4? No, game 3. Game 3, I was kind of like, why not just go Corki here anyway, even with the like bad matchup. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know.
I think this is why, like, this is where you can raise the criticism that the Corki double down that happened in like last series was also an issue. It's just that if your team relies so much on mid pressure, the laning phase was nerfed on the patch, right? Like, you want a champion that will create pressure for you in the lane phase. And we talked about this last split a lot with like Blabber Jojo, which is they don't necessarily play mid jungle as a duo that much. I think it got better this split, but when you're in a high pressure situation, I always say this, you default to habits. So that becomes targetable again. And we talked about Jojo's former teammates all ganking mid. I mean, Ayla was there. He knows how Jojo is in comms and what Jojo does, and how Jojo thinks of the minimap. So I'm not going to elaborate further, but that means that like he'll have a good idea. That will be something there, especially since Ayla does take more leadership responsibility on 100 Thieves. So I think that's like for sure something that will come up whenever it's like, you know, these people. Jojo has like a very specific way he operates, and I think anyone who's played with him before can identify it. So yeah. All right.
He was shouldering the brunt of the blame.
Yeah, he was. He became the lightning rod in lieu of Mithy, I guess. So
gotta blame someone.
I guess we can't just say like the team doesn't work together. We have to blame someone in particular. It's not a team game, League of Legends. You know, it's just not at all. Like, 'cause that's fake news. But I did want to bring something up, which is that it is now 3 years in a row that the most expensive roster, this is before Jack jumps down my throat because he's going to say, everyone agreed to a pay cut. It's like, yes, I get it, Jack. Everyone agreed to a pay cut, but you're still an expensive roster. Those can be the same thing. Yay. The most expensive roster has failed to qualify for Worlds. This is the third year in a row. I actually am very curious because I think there are a lot of mixed opinions on this. Do you think that's good or bad for LCS?
I think so. This is going to sound kind of awful because it's based on like how we got here and not what I think should happen, which is that players should be like paid well and not be undervalued, especially to like some previous salary discrepancies on the same team have been quite large, and this still happens in LPL a lot specifically, where you have like insane high value contracts and then people who are still performing really well, but they might be on their first part of the contract, so they're playing really well, but they're not getting paid as much as someone else on their team who might not even be performing as well. But I think if, and this is a big if, because this has happened now several times, and I still think, especially with the big shakeup that's coming with the Americas, teams really undervalue and don't scout. Like, not just even, we've talked about this in the NA ecosystem, why NA players get passed over. I feel like we have talked about this so much on like so many different episodes because it's something that makes you and me both very just personally angry. But if I could look forward and say, I trust North American orgs to take a look at this and be like, these high value contracts for established players that we're all just throwing on the lineup and hoping to be good because they're veterans and we know what they're capable of and we know that they're good players, instead of actually looking at up and coming talent and like where they can fit. If I thought that would happen because this C9 roster lost, I'd be like, yes, like actually pay attention to your scouting, you know, like if whether you're scouting from LCK Challengers or here, like just pay attention to how these players actually play and are going to work on a lineup. But I don't have faith that that's going to happen, especially with us losing 2 more teams and the available pool getting like even further narrowed down. I feel like a lot of teams are still going to go for established names for 2 reasons and pay them like instead of basically because a player on an entry contract, right, is not going to be paid as much. So if I thought that this could lead to teams cost cutting and then it would lead to them actually scouting newer players a lot better, especially from the NA ecosystem, I'd be in favor of it. I just do not see that happening. I still think teams are going to go for established names, especially to try to be able to sell themselves to fans better, which is really frustrating.
So, yeah, I have a couple of minds on this because obviously the GM thought process is, or like the org owner thought process is going to be that if teams are not willing to spend to acquire big name players, they're not contributing to the viewership health of the league. If there are players with brand value, if there are players that exist that will bring in additional viewers, because holy shit, I want to see Faker play. You know, this is why I feel like TL will reach out to Faker every offseason, you know, whatever. That's always like the running meme, right? Then, you know, they believe that like 100 IMT is bad. Like a lot of GMs and owners outside of IMT believe that IMT is bad for the league because they're not willing to spend money, right? They think that that is like objectively bad for the league. And makes it harder for the other orgs to spend revenue, because if you're spending a lot more than IMT, right? And IMT is, because the revenue pool is shared, and if you're spending a lot more than IMT is spending less money because they are getting less high brand value players, then the cost burden is more on you. You end up, and the percentage of the revenue that goes down from the perception that we're not able to get as many sponsorship deals, we're not able to get as many of these factors because you have one team that's like consistently just tanking the brand value of the league, then it's worse off for you within like the piece of the pie that you achieve. And a lot of people will be of the opinion that there should always be a team that like overspends, that brings a lot of high brand value players to the league. But if that team is not able to win, then the incentive to do that is worse, which is why like spending, and a lot of people say that that's why like partnerships, monetary gain has gone down year over year, is because these rosters are failing, right? So that's like the argument that it will be made here. Like, let's say you have a roster like 100 Thieves, not a lot of super well-known players, some rookies. They will get more viewership, and they're going to Worlds, right? They get more viewership objectively when they play against C9, right? Than when they play against IMT, I don't know, whatever. Like, IMT is the low-hanging fruit. But when they play against those teams, also that's why the DIG roster exists, right? They had all those brand value names. So there's like a big difference between building a roster to win and building a roster that people think will help make the league money. Of course, making the league money by spending a lot of money means that you're spending a lot. The league revenue is increasing by, I don't know, the small amount. It's probably not that worth for you unless you can go to Worlds, get a big sponsor deal internationally or something, and then come back and try to make a little bit back, right? That's like probably the thought process there. So the idea that these rosters keep this is the argument as to like why the people think that these rosters failing is bad for the league. I think it is unavoidable that people will take brand value into account when scouting. It is unavoidable. Like, it will always happen. We are an entertainment product. That's how it is. Personally, though, because of the huge discrepancy in my mind and the huge deficiency in scouting, I do think it is an overall net benefit still that these rosters fail. I think it will continue to be an overall net benefit until the amount being spent at the top goes down enough that it's reasonable. Because right now it's just currently still not reasonable. And it might be bad for the players because they can't get the big contracts, they can't get the big bag for this point in their career, but I think that money shouldn't exist given the state of esports globally right now in terms of its ability to make money in almost any sphere. So that sucks, but it's like this has to be a passion project for now, and the overall health of the ecosystem, in my opinion, should be such that like the peak roster spend right now is lower. Do I think that there will ever be a case where if it gets to a point where, sorry, this is a very long explanation. If it gets to a point where the peak roster spend is, the team with peak roster spend is suddenly generating revenue, I actually think that's bad for the league. Because the peak roster spend should never make money. It doesn't make money in any of the top orgs in sports. The peak roster spend does not make money. Peak roster spend is basically always a losing bet that you will win the league, right? It's always that. And then you always lose money on that. Like that's the case in football. That's the case in pretty much any sport, right? You will spend money on these brand name players, these big players, and you will not generate money that year, but you will get some kind of brand value. You'll be able to market yourself, and that's why those rosters in those sports always implode and people always get fired. That's just like a function of the ecosystem. If we ever get to a point where the roster that is spending money makes revenue, that spending the most money makes revenue that year, I think that's bad for the ecosystem. So if we get to that point because the peak roster spend money keeps losing, then I think it's bad. But I don't think we are yet to that point. We are still not making money if your name is not like one IMT. Like we're still not making money. So I don't think we are at that point. So I think at this point in time, the fact that the peak roster spends are losing is still good for the league. Yeah.
Makes sense. I mean, it's also like it's annoying because we're talking about this as if it's in a vacuum, but there's also, and like I'll try not to get into this super in depth, but it's also infuriating to me because it's like, how did we get here, right? And how did we get here was when these leagues started up, there was still this push-pull between the idea of, prior to franchising, League of Legends as an esport is a marketing arm for the game, and it's the biggest marketing arm for the game. And we've talked about this so many times here in terms of how that's undervalued. But then when franchising happened, it's like, okay, you guys, as franchises, the expectation is that you're going to be profitable, right? And so what has to happen in order to get there? Well, we don't have broadcast rights, which is the biggest thing, right? We don't have and again, you and I have talked about this before, but like I'm just talking about like how did we get here in terms of teams losing so much money on the whole and trying for super high brand value rosters in the face of this is like there's so few, even with the late, and I'm talking late not in this year, but like late as in from when esports started to now, addition of stuff, revenue sharing from like emotes and stuff like that. Like gradually these kind of things have been added, but if you don't have like a stadium that you're making money off of people actually attending games from like ticket sales and concession sales, and I would even tie like merch and jersey sales into that as well, even though those are obviously sold outside of venues. So you don't have that as a source of revenue. You don't have broadcast rights as a source of revenue. You literally only have partnerships pretty much. And we've talked about how like fluid partnerships are, especially when the league is suddenly on a downturn or LOL Esports is seen on a downturn. That has a snowball effect in the opposite direction, where initially everyone was coming in and throwing a lot of money at these teams and partnerships, but now that it's perceived as a lot less value, there's an opposite snowball effect where partners end up pulling out, or they don't give you as much money for their sponsorship, even if the like exterior of the sponsorship doesn't change to fans necessarily. And so I think that's also a huge part of it in terms of like how we got here, right? Because teams are still struggling to find ways to even like break even in a lot of cases, because there are still so few options available to them in regards to how to make money.
Yep. And it's just
we're ending on a super downer note.
I don't know. It's I don't know. I just think it's an interesting question because like it's definitely been a question that has started to exist, that like started with like the 2022 TL roster, right? Because that was like the first time the big roster spend roster like completely didn't make worlds. Yeah. Because usually
and it was 100 Thieves again. 100 Thieves.
Because
the big roster killer.
Oh no, is TL 2022? Yeah. Oh no, you meant that they
no,
killed,
but it was 100 Thieves who stopped them.
In
so
fairness,
like
100 Thieves also spent a lot of money on their roster. Like we don't talk about it. They were probably like second or close to second.
The second.
Yeah.
Oh no, I'm just saying it's funny that's the same org.
Yeah, it is funny. But I think the TLDR though is like that's been a question. It's like a lot of GMs will say, no, this is really bad. This is bad for players. This is bad for the health of the league. But, you know, in my opinion, it's good as long as it is forcing a change that is reasonable. And that's pretty much it. Miracu would like you to talk about baseball before we go. He has been asking me over and over again if Ohtani is the GOAT, and I said that is not a me question, that is an Emily question. So,
no.
Wow.
Still really early in his career.
Shut
like
down.
I think the way I feel about Ohtani is that, and this is gonna sound really cheesy and stupid. But it's the same way I feel about watching anyone who's just so good at the sport they play. And I'm just like, wow, I'm really glad that like I'm here and able to watch this in real time. I always think that's insanely cool. Like I felt the same way about Yuzuru Hanyu before he retired, who's a figure skater for people that don't know. And I feel the same way about Ohtani, right? Where I'm just like, I'm really glad that I get to watch this guy just do insane things. Especially even though I hate the Dodgers. Especially now that he's actually on a good team and not like wasting away alongside Mike Trout on the Angels, which Mike Trout has seemed to stick himself to that team until the bitter end. So I wish him nothing but the best. But yeah, I don't think you can say he's the greatest of all time yet. I just think people should be really happy with being able to watch him do absolutely insane things in real time.
Nice. So basically, your
I hope
baseball.
he gets.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, I was gonna say I hope he gets the 50-50. Right? You know how he's or do you know this? Like there's basically, I'm gonna try to find it actually. I'll go to the baseball subreddit. There's a really funny home runs to stolen bases graphic, and it's like Shohei Ohtani is like so far ahead of everyone in terms of getting both of them. So I hope he gets 50 stolen bases and 50 home runs, because that'd just be really fun.
So
he's going for it. He should get it.
He should get it, you think? Okay.
Yeah, no, he actually should get it. He's at like 40. Is that like 40 something and 40 something? I think he's at like 44 and 46 after last night. If I'm not mistaken, 44 home runs and 46 stolen bases.
Nice. Well, I have basically no context on any of this, but people in chat seem to be excited about baseball now. So, you know, there's that. By people in chat,
that's the first time people have been excited about baseball in a really long time, I think, which is very cool because baseball is not, let's just say, I feel like Ohtani is making it so that baseball is a lot more in the public consciousness, which I think hasn't happened in a while.
Baseball, so Ohtani is bringing sexy back to baseball. Is that?
Sure, we could say that. I'm not sure if baseball is ever sexy to me, but sure.
We've got that going. Okay. But yeah, I think that's that. Miracu would also like you to review the Cheddar tier list, but if you don't have time for that, that's valid.
I'm not gonna do that.
Yeah, anyway, good times. So thanks everyone. Been super fun. Thanks for this week. I'll try to make the episode more interesting next week. I just like my motivation to do anything this weekend was really low. So that's my bad.
It's kind of an all around like, oh, these finals happened, but also the biggest surprise was definitely 100 Thieves, right? Everything else kind of went to plan.
I'm pretty sure we spent like an hour plus talking about C9 100 and like a half hour talking about everything else.
Yeah.
This is
like,
literally...
so BLG sure stomped Weibo.
Like,
as expected.
BLG, I'll try to come up with some good questions. Like, I think one that the LPL broadcast has talked about, for example, is like, is LPL a one team region this year? Like, things like that. So, yeah. we'll have some fun next week. Of course, I'm sure next week we'll get to talk about KT a lot. So yeah.
We'll be disqualified from Worlds.
Anyway, thanks. If you're watching on YouTube or Spotify, also I'm really sorry that the Spotify episode didn't go up on time last week. If you're watching on YouTube or Spotify, don't forget to like or subscribe. If you have not subscribed to the Coffee account, remember to do that. There is a Making the Rounds tier for those of you who do not care about anything else I do and just like making the rounds. So feel free to sub to that. And yeah. Thanks everyone, and we will see you next week at probably once again a not predictable time. So, yay.